Welcome to the next episode of Real Stories Leadership Series for the Canadian real estate industry. I'm your host, Chandran Fernando of Matrix360, and we're very excited to collaborate with Informa Canada to deliver a platform for leaders to share their experiences. The intent of our dialogue series is to engage with business leaders as they share their insights and wisdom. And now, before we commence about our series, a little tidbit about Matrix360. We are an advisory platform that connects the human experience with business innovation. It is with great privilege and responsibility that we partner and advocate for people in our industry of real estate. And today we are here at the Land and Development Real Estate Conference in Toronto, Canada, and we're honored to be joined by Josh Sirefman, Chief Development Officer of Sidewalk Labs. And welcome, Josh, to our leadership series. Really a pleasure to have you here.
Great to be here.
So we're going to kind of kick the start about our conversation piece. It's going to be based on your journey. So I would like to walk with you, with your permission, for 15 minutes, right, down memory lane of what you've done, where you've been, and how you got here to Sidewalk Labs in Toronto, of all places. So welcome to Toronto.
Thank you.
The city of diversity and inclusion, we call it, right? So I want to, take me back to the time when you were choosing your elective in the educational system, and you chose African American Studies at Wesleyan University as a white young male. What made you gravitate to this particular discipline?
I wish I had some great pithy answer.
Yeah.
I found it incredibly interesting and just gravitated to that. I was within American Studies, focused on African American Studies, and they were just resonated with me, and the rest just took off.
So what was that piece that resonated with you in regards to this particular culture and history?
I think so many different dimensions to it. I actually ended up becoming very focused on Black radical politics and efforts. I have a collection of out-of-print books about the Black Panther Party.
Do you really?
Yeah. Cool. But I found the politics extraordinarily interesting. Culturally, I was a drummer, and actually I had the opportunity at Wesleyan to study with one of the great unsung master drummers, a guy named Ed Blackwell, who revolutionary in the free jazz movement. Just all these pieces came together. It was just a subject I found extraordinarily interesting.
Fascinating.
Fascinating in multiple ways.
In connection.
Yeah.
And then that led you to do a master's in urban development planning at
Yeah,
University of Michigan.
I actually sort of went somewhat sideways for a while, where for about 4 or 5 years, I thought I would work in the arts, and I had a series of jobs in the administration side of the arts, and discovered that was not, in fact, where I wanted to go. And my father had been bothering me to go to graduate school. Being a good Wesleyan alum, I believed that the profit motive was bad, and so I wrote off an MBA or a law degree. I found this thing called urban planning that actually everything I read about, I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I love that. And it's actually, that picked up from where my undergraduate interests left off, and sort of then started talking about cities and urban issues. And so I ended up going to University of Michigan for a master's in urban planning, and got very involved there in the city of Detroit. It was in many ways a seminal experience for my career.
So when you speak to the city of Detroit and how that was sort of almost like a catalyst to help you into the real estate development strategy, we'll call it, what was that specific, was it in regard to the people side, the urban design side, or combination of multiple factors?
It's a great question. I think it was because I had never before realized that in many ways place becomes the canvas for where all things unfold. And so when you think about planning issues, you think about development, it's the venue for everything. And so I first started working... For connection. Yeah. I first started working with a community development corporation in a neighborhood on the east side of Detroit with an amazing guy who ran it. and it was an extraordinary education for me. And Detroit's an incredibly interesting city, so in multiple ways, and so it was really defining for me.
So it's kind of fascinating because that's where I grew up for my post-secondary education as well. So, and I was working in the urban center of Detroit with high-risk youth. So it's kind of fascinating when I kind of like connect us like this is kind of cool. But going back to you, when you talk about your journey in school, getting into the development world, working, and now at Sidewalk Labs, and managing this new huge creative development process for the city of Toronto and waterfront Toronto. What's one little highlight that you could actually speak to that really speaks volumes on the positive impact that you've had on the impact of your work?
That we've had in Toronto, or that I've had?
In your career journey in the last 15 plus years,
we'll
say.
Not a little uncomfortable to talk about my own impact on it. What we're trying to do is new and different, and pulls from lots of disciplines, pulls from lots of ways of thinking, and we're charting new territory. And I actually do think in some ways, I have lived on public, private, government, institutional, not-for-profit side of issues and placemaking issues, and I think that has helped me to really help tie all the pieces together for us at Sidewalk Labs and advance the thinking in a holistic way. It's really complicated. Cities are complicated. People are complicated. The whole point of what we're trying to do is to think holistically. And I hope my impact has been in helping pull all the pieces together into a coherent, thoughtful way to sort of keep moving forward.
So as we move forward in the Sidewalk Labs in Toronto, when you reflect back on your journey, what's one impactful, I would say, memory for you that has actually helped instigate and to help push this amazing project for the city of Toronto? Like from a personal or business perspective, so you are the puzzle maker. You are actually the connector for the puzzle pieces, right? As a chief development officer, that's your strategy behind it. So how can you, when you reflect back on your journey, what's one piece of that puzzle that connects it back?
One element, I think I had a period of time before Sidewalk Labs where I ran my own business, and what I did was I really became the almost sort of rented executive running transformative endeavors for entities that didn't necessarily have the wherewithal on their own. And what I really had to do there was connect the dots across all the different stakeholders. So for example, in working with universities, staff and executive team and board and trustees and academia and the external world, and being the glue across those, I think actually was enormously helpful for what now we're trying to do with Sidewalk Labs.
So when you speak to the Sidewalk Labs part, we'll just go here and then we'll go back to your personal journey. Is the Sidewalk Labs connection, it's all about engagement. It's about the community element. It's about bringing people together to create bigger and better and use technology for the benefit for human connectivity. So when you look at that scope, hopefully I summarized it
better than I could. So
when you look at it in that scope, when we look at the element of the demographics of people coming from New York City to another very highly diverse demographic city that is still young in its growth, we'll say. And some stats that we speak to in the Canadian demographics world is in the GTA world, which is the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, 53% of the population, of the urban population, is of a racialized or culturally diverse group. Then when we look at the gender component, 52% are of the female persuasion. So when we have these two major demographic components, when we look at the corporate structures within these organizations that are part of the City of Toronto, in leadership positions, we have less than 25% of culturally diverse individuals in leadership positions. So it's a huge discord, we'll call it. And then and for the female leadership, it's less than 32%, I believe. So 34%. So knowing that, although Toronto is focused on being a diverse, inclusive city, why hasn't that, from your experience, and it's not a one silver bullet answer here, what do you think it's the barriers or holding back this true inclusive momentum to happen?
Yeah, that's it. That's the whole question.
Yeah, that's the whole question. What's the whole momentum behind it?
It's such a massive, deep question.
Yeah.
I think I would come at it from a few different angles,
Please.
Which are slightly different. One of the reasons that we at Sidewalk Labs are so attracted to Toronto is in fact that diversity and how real it is, and more so than in New York. It's an incredible and wonderful thing, and also certainly from the outside it feels like something that Torontonians embrace, and that was extremely intriguing and attractive for us. The second angle I would approach that with is that our whole notion is to sort of help create a place that can sort of define new models for how we approach lots of urban issues. We made a commitment to ourselves early on in the work that we've done that if we were part of placemaking, the population of such a place would have to reflect the socioeconomic diversity of the metropolitan region around it. That we're not here to inspire anything that remotely resembles a gated community of any sort. It really legitimately has to embrace and reflect that diversity. How to do that is, I think, in fact, part of the same question you are asking, and I think that's a tough question that we are wrestling with now, and actually literally hope to engage with lots of people on, and sort of figure out strategies to ensure that there not just diversity, but that there is sort of legitimate feeling of access, that sort of there's a sort of welcome from in every aspect of what we do that can result in legitimate growth and diversity
towards
and then I would want one other thing, which
Please.
is I spent my career in industries where I would love to see much more diversity in as people enter the field, and whether you define urban planning, development, whatever the title you use is, and we're trying to do things that sort of make our contribution. First, we at Sidewalk Labs need to reflect the community that we want to be a part of. Secondly, we have programs that we've created here in Toronto. For example, we have a fellows program. We have an incredible array of students in college who are all getting an incredible almost crash course and exposure on urban development issues, on waterfront development issues, on the kind of thinking that we're involved in. And at the end of the day, I kind of feel like that stuff is maybe as important, if not more important, than so many of the other things. And so, I don't have all the answers.
No.
I'm humbled by your even asking the question. But I think we can chip away.
Exactly, and I think that's a part of it. It's like, access comes in multiple levels, right? It's the exposure to it, because at the end of the day, symbols do matter. And when we start speaking, it's like, the language of being inclusive. It's that how do we actually create the element to create that engagement piece? So saying that is that, as a young person, if you could go back in time and speak to your 20-year-old self of the information that you know now and the knowledge that you've gained now, what words of wisdom would you share with young Josh when he was just entering his post-grad?
I think I wish I had known more that you can do your part to change the system from inside the system. And I think, I know lots of people probably have different views on that. My path was, I didn't know that, and I didn't think so. And I feel like I lost time because it took me a while to understand how to find a path to impact. And sometimes I think back and I wish I'd known that. business is a good thing, and commerce is a good thing, and find the ways to influence
from the inside.
That is as
growth.
Valid an approach
Yes.
as from the outside.
Yes.
And I'm not sure I fully understood that.
Yeah, no, you've answered it. So it's basically being able to go back in and remind yourself is like to make progressive change.
Yeah.
It's to understand how the system works, what are the mechanics behind it, and use curiosity to move to the next level, which is great. Now, as a leader, right, and a recognized leader for Toronto, for the city of Toronto, the Sidewalk Labs area, when you look at the young leadership that is coming into the system and who are actually in the system of corporate Canada and corporate America, what are the factors that you look for when you're hiring, when you're promoting, when you're trying to bring engagement to another level so that you could actually create that inclusive workplace and place for the community?
I think it's a great and timely question for us at Sidewalk Labs. Mostly because we are and we have been a startup, and as we experience growth, there's opportunity to really think about these and be deliberate and not accidental or not sort of lose the opportunities to think about these things. So we're now very focused not just on how do we ensure that we go the extra mile to find candidates that will bring different perspectives, but also to start thinking about empowerment within our own organization. And I think we're at the beginning of sort of how do we start it, make that almost systemic as an organization. Step one for us was deep recognition. That is as important a subject to spend time on as anything else that we're doing. And so we're really just on the cusp of ensuring that we're thinking that way.
That the value chain is connected to it.
That it's connected, that people sort of, there is that we're fostering people as much as the mission. When you're in a very powerfully mission-oriented organization, sometimes other stuff doesn't get enough attention. And I think for us, people is first and foremost now. And I think going that extra mile on recruiting, on searching, on questioning, we've had a lot of, I think, internally healthy questioning of, I use the term carefully, but there's a sort of self-selection bias that happens, and sort of making sure, are we in fact pushing? Are we going to sources for potential talent that we would not otherwise think of?
Yes.
And it's the kind of thing where if you do sort of push that extra mile, you'd be sort of amazed how much that doesn't happen in the normal course of circumstances.
So it's really thinking outside the framework and seeing how can you be more adaptable to what's external, and how do you bring the external into, so that ideas are more generated and it's still mission focused, and that's a very key thing. So if you could, last two questions is, if you could speak to the impact that you would like to leave as a chief development officer, as a business leader, as a person who's been looked up to, what would that be for your daughter, or for her friends, or for the young people and the individuals who are watching?
Another small question.
Tiny question.
Tiny question. In New York, I've been very lucky to have the opportunity to be involved in things where I can take her, and there are literally physical evidence of something I helped make happen. And that, for me, just given what I love, has been beyond rewarding. My hope is that the impact I can have is to help forge a new way of doing things in this whole notion of city shaping and placemaking, and that the outcomes that I've had an impact in making happen are in fact extraordinary.
Yes.
I can point to my career and say there's been a lot of things that I was so involved in that I can say I had a part in making that happen. I now want to push on that something truly groundbreaking and extraordinary, and setting a new path. And it sounds a little bit hyperbolic.
Yeah.
But like that's to me now. I want her to know how to
That there's potential.
that there's
yes.
potential and that
Yeah.
she can think differently and
Yes.
do things and find new paths.
Which is amazing. So one word to summarize this 15 minutes of conversation to describe Josh's journey that could capture the true essence of you as a leader.
Oh, that's unfair. I mean, of all
Isn't
these
it?
questions.
I know, right? You're doing a great job.
Thoughtful.
Thoughtful, which is great. So as I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your candidacy, which is really important, would really like to, on behalf of Matrix360 and Informa Canada, truly thank you from speaking from the care element of human connectivity and bringing that to Toronto through Sidewalk Labs. So to learn more about Matrix360 and Informa Canada, please check out Informa Canada's website. Thank you, Josh,
Thank you.
for joining us, and definitely continue the conversation again.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.